My name is Liam and I'm 25. I design interiors online, mostly mood boards and 3D renders for clients who never see my face. 2 months ago, I moved back to Boulder, Colorado, into the small cedar shingled house my father left me when he died. It sits at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of street where porch lights flick on at dusk and dogs bark once then settle. The house smells faintly of pine and old books the way it always did when Dad was alive. I kept his leather armchair by the window, the one that faces the neighbor's kitchen. I told myself it was for the light. I work late. Most nights I'm hunched over my laptop until the numbers on the screen blur. By midnight, the street is asleep, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. That's how it was the night everything tilted. It was a Thursday in early October, the air crisp enough to bite the back of my neck. I'd stepped onto the front porch with a beer, needing a break from a client who wanted coastal grandma but make it moody. The sky was clear stars sharp. Across the low picket fence, the neighbor's kitchen window glowed soft yellow. Thin curtains, the kind that don't quite close. I could see movement inside, someone passing back and forth, slow, deliberate. A woman. She wore a pale cardigan, sleeves pushed to the elbows, hair loose and dark. I didn't mean to stare, it was just... There she was, framed like a painting I hadn't asked to see. She reached for something on a high shelf, the motion stretching the fabric across her back. I looked away, took a sip of beer, looked back. She was still there, turning now, a glass in her hand. The light caught the curve of her neck. I told myself to go inside. Instead, I stayed half hidden by the shadow of the porch post, watching the way she moved, like she knew the room by heart, like she belonged to it. Then she stopped, turned fully toward the window. Toward me. Our eyes met through the glass. No flinch, no wave, no smile. Just a steady gaze, as if she'd been waiting for me to notice. My pulse kicked hard. I stepped back, beer sloshing over my fingers. When I looked again, she was gone. The kitchen empty, the light unchanged. I laughed at myself, nervous, stupid. Probably imagined it. I finished the beer, crushed the can, and went inside. The house felt smaller, suddenly the silence louder. I left the porch light off. 10 minutes later, 3 knocks. Soft, but deliberate. Not the mailman, not a solicitor. I opened the door. She stood on the matte cardigan, unbuttoned, now hair, slightly mussed, holding a small plate covered in foil. The porch light from her house spilled across her face, high cheekbones, faint lines at the corners of her eyes, lips bare. Older than me, maybe 38. Beautiful in a way that didn't ask permission. "Hi," she said, voice low, a little amused. "I'm Elena. From next door," I managed a nod. "Liam. I made too much lemon bars." She lifted the plate slightly. "Thought you might want some." I should have said thanks, taken the plate, closed the door. Instead, I stood there, mouth dry. She didn't wait. Stepped past me into the living room like she'd been here before. The scent followed vanilla, something warmer like cedar after rain. She set the plate on the coffee table, peeled back the foil. The bars were still warm. "I saw you," she said, not looking at me. "On the porch." Heat crawled up my neck. "I wasn't. It's okay." She turned, then eyes direct. "If you want to look, just ask." The words hung in the air, simple and sharp. No smile, no flirtation, just fact. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened my mouth, closed it. She watched me for a long second, then walked back to the door. Paused on the threshold. "Night, Liam." The door clicked shut. I stood in the middle of the room, the plate cooling between us, the echo of her voice looping in my head. "If you want to look, just ask." I didn't sleep. I sat in Dad's armchair, staring at the dark window across the fence, the kitchen light still on. The lemon bars sat untouched. I could still smell her. The next morning, I woke to the smell of lemon still clinging to the air. I'd left the plate on the table, one bar missing a corner, where I'd finally given in around 3 a.m. The house felt different, like someone had turned the volume up on everything, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the way the light slanted through the blinds. I kept replaying her voice. "If you want to look, just ask." I told myself it was nothing. A neighbor being friendly, a weird icebreaker. I showered, dressed, opened my laptop, and tried to work. By noon, the cursor hadn't moved. I kept glancing at the window. The kitchen next door was dark, curtains drawn. I forced myself to finish a render, sent it off, then stood in the doorway staring at the plate. I should return it. That was the polite thing. I washed it, dried. It walked the 10 steps to her porch and knocked. No answer. I left it on the mat with a sticky note, "Thanks, L." That night the light came on again. I was at my desk, headphones in, pretending to focus. The movement caught my eye, Elena at the sink sleeves, rolled hair in a loose knot. She looked up, saw me, and lifted a hand in a small wave. I waved back before I could stop myself. She smiled, just a flicker, then disappeared. 2 days later, the plate was back on my porch, clean, with a new batch of lemon bars and a note in neat handwriting. Wi-Fi password is Boulder Rocks 42, in case you need it. E. I laughed out loud alone in the kitchen. I didn't need her Wi-Fi, I had my own. But I typed the password anyway, watched the signal bars fill, and felt something loosen in my chest. She started coming over with excuses that weren't excuses. Tuesday evening, she knocked holding an empty sugar jar. "Mark's out of town," she said, stepping inside before I answered. "He forgets to restock." I poured what I had into her jar. She lingered, leaning against the counter watching me measure. "You always this precise?" she asked. I shrugged. "It's just sugar," she smiled like I'd said something clever. Thursday, she brought a bottle of red. I opened it for dinner and only had one glass. She lied smoothly. We sat on the couch, legs not touching, and talked about nothing. Her job managing a small art gallery downtown, my dad's old jazz records, the way the mountains looked pink at sunset. She kicked off her shoes, tucked her feet under her. The wine loosened her voice, made her laugh low and easy. When she reached for the bottle, her sleeve brushed my arm. Neither of us moved away. "You still haven't asked?" she said, suddenly swirling the wine in her glass. Asked what? She looked at me over the rim, eyes dark in the lamplight. "You know." I swallowed. The room felt smaller. "I don't." She set the glass down, leaned forward just enough that I caught the scent of her hair. "Then I'll wait." She left at midnight, the bottle half empty, her laughter still echoing in the hallway. I stood at the door longer than I needed to, watching her cross the strip of grass between our houses, the porch light catching the swing of her hips. The visits became routine. She'd appear after 9 sometimes with a book she forgot at the gallery, sometimes with nothing at all. We'd talk, drink, sit closer than we had the time before. She told me about Mark, how they met in grad school, how he used to leave her notes in the margins of her textbooks, how somewhere along the way the notes stopped. "He's not cruel," she said one night, staring at the ceiling, "just absent." I nodded like I understood. I didn't, but I listened. One Thursday, she showed up in a silk blouse, the color of storm clouds, hair damp from the shower. "I couldn't sleep," she said. We ended up on the floor, backs against the couch, passing a bowl of popcorn. Her knee rested against mine. When she laughed at something I said, her hand landed on my thigh and stayed there. I didn't move. Neither did she. "You're good at this," she murmured. "At what? Making the quiet feel full." I looked at her, then really looked. The faint lines at her eyes, the way her mouth curved when she was thinking. I wanted to ask. I wanted to say it. But the words stuck. She stood first, brushed popcorn salt from her jeans. At the door, she paused, fingers on the knob. "You still haven't asked," she said again, softer this time. Then she was gone. The click of the latch loud in the stillness. I sat on the floor a long time, the bowl between my feet, her warmth still on my leg. I knew what she meant. I knew what I wanted. And I knew I was running out of reasons to pretend otherwise. The visit stopped being casual. Elena no longer needed an excuse. She simply appeared and I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting. Some nights she came straight from the gallery, still in the charcoal blazer she wore for opening's heels, clicking on my porch like punctuation. Other nights she showed up in sweatpants and one of Mark's old college shirt sleeves, rolled past her elbows, hair twisted up with a pencil. I never knew which version I'd get, and the uncertainty became its own kind of drug. We developed rituals. She'd pour 2 glasses of whatever was open. I'd put on a record Billie Holiday Coltrane, whatever Dad had left in the crate. We'd sit on the floor because the couch felt too formal now, knees almost touching the space between us, shrinking by degrees. Conversation drifted from safe harbors, her favorite painter, my worst client horror story, into deeper water. She told me about the first time Mark forgot their anniversary, how she'd cooked osso buco, and eaten it alone at the dining table. I told her about the night my dad died, how I'd found him in the same armchair TV still flickering. She listened without pity, just a quiet nod that said she understood the shape of absence. One Thursday, the sky cracked open. Rain hammered the roof like it had a grudge. I was mid-render when the power flickered, died, then surged back. 10 minutes later, the knock came, 3 sharp raps urgent. I opened the door and Elena was soaked through blouse plastered to her skin hair, dripping onto the mat. Her lips were blue. "Mark's in Denver," she said, teeth chattering. The fight was bad. I stepped aside. She crossed the threshold without hesitation, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, wrapped it around her shoulders. She smelled like rain and the same vanilla that haunted my sheets now. She didn't speak. She didn't, just stood there shivering until I guided her to the couch. I turned on the gas fireplace. The flames threw orange light across her face. She stared into the fire for a long time. Then he said, "I'm a ghost in my own house." The words landed heavy. I sat beside her close enough to feel the chill radiating off her skin. "You're not a ghost here." She turned, eyes glassy, not from the rain. "Prove it." I reached for the throw blanket, draped it over her legs. She caught my wrist. Her grip was cold but steady. "Don't be gentle, Liam, not tonight." I swallowed. The room felt suddenly too small, the air thick. She leaned in, forehead against mine, breath warm on my lips. We stayed like that, hovering on the edge of a kiss that would change everything until she pulled back an inch. "I'm married," she whispered like she needed to hear it out loud. "I know. That should stop us. It hasn't." She laughed a broken sound. Then she curled into me, head on my shoulder, arms around my waist. I held her while the storm raged outside. Her breathing evened out. She fell asleep against my chest, fingers still clutching my shirt. I didn't move, didn't dare. The fire crackled. The clock ticked past 2. Sometime before dawn, she stirred. I thought she'd leave. Instead, she shifted, pressed closer, one leg sliding over mine. Her hand found my jaw and the dark thumb tracing the stubble. "Stay," she murmured. Not a question. I carried her to the guest room, Dad's old office, now just a bed and a lamp. Laid her down, pulled the quilt up to her chin. She caught my hand before I could retreat. "Lie with me. Just lie." I did. Fully clothed on top of the covers, her back to my front. She smelled like wet wool and lemon bars and something indefinably her. I listened to her breathe until the rain softened to a whisper. When I woke at 6, she was gone. The pillow still held the shape of her head. Later that morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in her neat script on the back of a gallery receipt. "Thank you for not asking." Below it, a single lipstick print, deep plum, perfect. I folded the paper, slipped it into my wallet, and went to work. But the day blurred. Every render I opened looked like her silhouette. Every notification ping sounded like her knock. That night, she came again. No rain, no excuse. Just stood on my porch in a black dress, hair down, eyes steady. "I can't stay away," she said. "I don't want you to." She stepped inside, closed the door, and for the first time kissed me. Not soft, not tentative. A kiss that tasted like desperation and wine, and the promise of ruin. Her hands fisted in my shirt. My back hit the wall. The world narrowed to the heat of her mouth, the scrape of her teeth, the way she sighed my name like a secret she'd been keeping for years. We broke apart, gasping, foreheads pressed together. She laughed, shaky, exhilarated. "We're in trouble," she said. "Yeah," I breathed. "We are." The kiss left a bruise on my conscience. For 3 days, I walked around with the taste of her on my tongue and the weight of what we'd done pressing against my ribs. Elena didn't come over. The kitchen light next door stayed off. I told myself it was for the best. I lied. On the 4th morning, I saw her in the driveway loading groceries into the back of Mark's SUV. She wore sunglasses, hair in a tight bun, movements brisk. When she glanced my way, I lifted a hand. She hesitated, then nodded, once polite, distant. The kind of nod you give a stranger. My stomach dropped. That night, I couldn't stand it. I paced the living room until the floorboards groaned, then grabbed my keys and walked the fence line. The air was sharp, the first real bite of winter. Her porch light was on. I stopped at the edge of the grass. Elena. She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, cardigan pulled tight. No smile. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." She stepped onto the porch, closed the door behind her. Mark's home. I saw. Silence stretched between us, thick as the frost starting to form on the railing. She looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched against the cold. "I'm avoiding you," she said finally. "I noticed. It's not because I regret it." Her voice cracked on the last word. "It's because I want it again, and I can't stop wanting it." I took a step closer. "Then don't stop." She laughed bitter. "You make it sound simple. It isn't." "No." She rubbed her arms. "It's selfish. Dangerous. I have a life, Liam. A husband who pays the bills, a house I picked out the paint for, a routine I've kept for 12 years. And you." She stopped, eyes searching my face. "You're 25. You have everything ahead of you." "I have you in my head every second I'm awake," I said. "That's not nothing." She looked away toward the dark street. "He asked where I was the night of the storm. I told him I stayed at the gallery. He believed me, or pretended to. I don't know anymore." I wanted to touch her. Instead, I shoved my hands in my pockets. "What do you want, Elena?" She met my eyes. "I want to be seen, not managed, not tolerated, seen." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "You do that. You look at me like I'm the only thing in the room. Mark hasn't done that in years." I swallowed hard. "I'm not asking you to leave him, I know." Her voice dropped. "But I'm asking myself what I'm willing to lose." Another silence. The wind rattled the gutters. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then stopped. "I can't be the reason your life falls apart," I said. "You already are." She stepped off the porch, closed the distance until we were a foot apart. "But I'm the one who knocked on your door. I'm the one who kissed you. Don't take that from me." I reached out, brushed the tear from her cheek with my thumb. She leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering shut. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too, of what? Of wanting something I can't have? Of hurting you? Of waking up one day and realizing I destroyed the only real thing I've felt in years?" She opened her eyes. "You won't destroy me. I'm already broken. You just make the pieces fit for a little while." I wanted to kiss her again. Wanted to pull her inside, lock the door, pretend the world outside didn't exist. Instead, I dropped my hand. "Go home, Elena." She searched my face, then nodded once. Turned toward her house. At the steps, she paused. "Liam." "Yeah, if I knock again." "Will you open?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. She walked inside the door, clicking shut behind her. The porch light went out. I stood in the cold until my fingers went numb, staring at the dark windows, knowing the next move wasn't mine to make. The rain came back on a Saturday night, hard and sudden, like the sky had been holding its breath for weeks. I was at my desk, headphones on, trying to finish a kitchen layout that looked nothing like the one Elena had described: white marble, brass fixtures, a window over the sink that caught the morning light. The power flickered. Thunder rolled. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark living room, listening to the storm tear at the gutters. 3 knocks. Not soft this time. Urgent. I knew before I opened the door. Elena stood on the mat, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face, a thin coat doing nothing against the downpour. Her eyes were red, lips trembling. "No plate, no wine, no excuse." "I can't do this anymore," she said, voice breaking on the words. I stepped aside. She crossed the threshold, water pooling at her feet. I closed the door, leaned against it. The house felt too small for what was about to happen. She didn't move farther in, just stood there, dripping, arms wrapped around herself. I told him. The air left my lungs. "Everything enough?" She laughed, a raw, jagged sound. I said I was unhappy, that I felt invisible. He asked if there was someone else. I didn't lie. I swallowed. What did he say? That he'd try harder, that we could go to counseling, and that he loves me. Her voice cracked again. "But love isn't the problem, Liam. It's the looking away." I took a step toward her. "Elena, I'm not leaving him. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." She looked up, eyes fierce through the tears. "But I needed you to know I see you. And you see me. And that matters more than anything I've had in years." The rain hammered the roof. I reached for her slow, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. I cupped her face, thumbs brushing the wet from her cheeks. She leaned into my hands, eyes closing. "I'm not asking you to choose," I said. "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper, but I'm here anyway. I pulled her against me. She buried her face in my neck, arms tight around my waist, soaking my shirt. We stood like that, swaying slightly, the storm raging outside. Her breathing hitched, then steadied. I felt her heartbeat against my ribs, fast and alive. She pulled back just enough to look at me. I don't know what happens next. Me neither. She nodded, then rested her forehead against mine. "Can we just be for tonight?" I led her to the couch. We sat, her head on my shoulder, my arm around her. The fire was cold, but the room was warm with her. She kicked off her shoes, curled her legs under her. I pulled the throw blanket over us both. She traced idle circles on my chest through my shirt. Minutes passed, or hours. The rain softened to a steady patter. She spoke once, voice muffled against my neck. "You make me feel like I'm still here." I pressed my lips to her hair. "You are." She fell asleep, first breath evening out, fingers still curled in my shirt. I stayed awake, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling, feeling the weight of her against me. Not heavy. Necessary. When the sky began to pale, she stirred. I thought she'd leave. Instead, she shifted, faced me, eyes open and clear. "I have to go," she said. "I know." She sat up, ran a hand through her damp hair. At the door, she paused, hand on the knob. "If you still want to look." She turned, met my eyes. "Next time, don't just look." She stepped into the gray morning, the door closed softly behind her. I stood in the quiet, the blanket still warm where she'd been, her scent lingering like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if she'd knock again or if I'd open if she did. But I knew one thing: I'd learned to love someone I couldn't hold. And somehow that was enough to keep me standing in the half light, waiting for whatever came after the storm.